Hello everyone and welcome back to the Educator Colin Snap channel. How you doing? So today we're going to be going over a new token, Series 3 token unlock list for May. My last one was a couple of months ago and I took a look at it. It's definitely a bit outdated now for the current season, so I wanted to have an updated token list for the people that need it. And I definitely want to talk that I did use some more data driven decision making for this particular list. I do want to kind of share that data in maybe a different video because I thought the data was pretty interesting. There's a lot of like unique things coming out of that particular data set. But with this one, use some data, also use my common sense and just general understandings to kind of organize the list in a knowledgeable way, and hope you guys enjoy this one. Let's take a look at the current list. So I do have it. They're not ordered in their own tiers, but they are in different tiers. So whatever's in a similar tier is around the same power level. But we do have the one outlier, the one S plus tier, the thing I think is best of the best cream of the crop for this particular season, which would be Sarah. So Sarah just statistically was an outlier in how it performed, and definitely had a ton of good compositions, good win rate, a lot of strong things to do with Sarah. So I would say this is the best card to get if you don't have it unlocked. I would consider saving up for it. I will say that all the ones below it, like right below it, are also very strong. So if you want to get a Doctor Doom, like don't waste a month looking for Sarah when you could just get a Doctor Doom day 2. Like, all right, don't do that. But definitely do think if you can, Sarah is the, I would say, best card to pick up. Next up, we have S tier. These are all still extremely strong. The difference between these and maybe some of the other ones is that these cards are very consistent, reliable, and fit in lots of different compositions. That it's really hard to not notice them when you're playing the game. So Doctor Doom, that's She-Hulk, Electro Wave. These cards are just very strong, very solid. You can make lots of good decks with them, and they just are consistent cards to play with. So I would recommend any of these cards. You can immediately build decks once you start getting a couple of these key pieces. Next up, we have the A tier. So this one is a little bit weaker, in my opinion, than some of the cards on top, but they are still very, very strong. We're still talking top 10 Series 3 cards. These cards are amazing. All right, there's just a little bit of a gap between these cards and some of the ones above it. But Mystique was in the top echelons in the previous video, but I looked at the stats and the stats kind of said maybe it's not as good as maybe some of the ones above it. So there was a little bit of a gap between Mystique and some of the other ones. Even though it's very popular, very common, there was some stats driven decision making for moving it down the slot. And then here we have a new addition, Basque. It's a new series 3 card from this month. Very strong card, has a lot of different builds, and is just a fun card to play with as well. So definitely something I would recommend you picking up if you don't have it. Agent Coulson, I would say, is probably underrated in how good it is. The 4s and 5s you get from it can really win you the game itself. And being able to play a card that your opponent does not expect is always just something to throw them off. Playing a random Claw, Iron Man can really give you that edge if they don't know it's coming. So definitely a card to play with, especially with Zabu, right? The 4-drop becomes 3 and you can really start doing some nutty things there. Daredevil, just a broken card. Being able to see your turn 5 opponent plays and snap into that is just not a fair mechanic, and just a very good way to get cubes off your opponent. Dracula is definitely a strong card, a little bit niche in how much it's played, but anytime you can play a deck with Dracula, it always seems to perform very well, so definitely a strong archetype. And then Patriot just is a good card, fits into a lot of particular Patriot decks with the Mystique, and you can definitely do a lot with Patriot, and it always seems to be in the meta consistently. Its stats aren't super crazy or anything, but it's just one of the better archetypes to pick up as a new player. You can really just do a lot with it, so definitely like Patriot there. And then here we have the B plus list. Doesn't really mean anything, but these are a little bit lower on the tier. They're not necessarily game breaking cards, but they're very strong and they have their own win conditions. Destroyer, that was my first Series 3 card and really just carried me. You can build a whole deck from a single Destroyer as your only Series 3 card, and it's just a very solid card. You see it played now with Nimrod and Galactus as well. So definitely a powerful deck. Arrow got nerfed. It used to be one of the best or the best Series 3 unlock, but then got nerfed a little bit. But even then, it's still seen in other decks. You can play with Sandman and Wave, things like that. It still performs decently well, just not as completely broken as it used to be. Magic, you do have to be careful with this card in particular because even though it's a good deck, it's a good archetype builder, you do have to be aware of what decks you're using it in, whether it's Infinite, She-Hulk, that kind of deck, or whatever you are playing, maybe Cerebro. You do have to be aware of that. So even though it's a good card, it's a card that you could get and then not know what to do with. So just definitely be aware of that. And it's the other 5 here: Juggernaut, Polaris, the Hood, Brute, Maximus. These are just statistically good cards. They just perform when you have these in your deck, and they're just very solid cards to pick up. And they usually have multiple decks you can play them in. So these are just good cards to play. And then the B slot, these are a little bit weaker, but they're still good. Anything above this arbitrary line, I believe, which is like above C, um, will be definitely good to play with. So even though they're not super crazy, Goose is really just a very good 2-drop, and it's usually comboed with Silver Surfer decks, and it seems to be the go-to for Silver Surfer. And because of that, the stats are very strong for Goose, and it just seems to be a good card that a lot of people can play with and annoy your opponents with. Beast is very solid. A lot of Hid Monkey taking advantage of it, but there are still other decks bouncing, so that Goose plays with, and it just seems to be a very solid card to have in your arsenal. Magneto is one of the more annoying cards. People always seem to forget about Magneto, but sometimes you think your Darkhawk is going to be winning a lane, and then Magneto comes, moves it to another lane, and well, whoops, your game plan changes dramatically. So Magneto is just one of the good late game 6-drop control cards that you can use. Leader as well, got nerfed, got rebuffed. It's back, baby. So definitely strong. There's a lot of synergies there with Electro and Wave, usually can be, as well as just playing Magneto normally, that you can do. So Magneto is definitely viable again, and I would say solid enough to put in the unlock list. And then Quinja is just a solid card. Usually synergize with any deck that runs Moon Girl. Quinja just says, hey, I'll make them all 1 cost cheaper, and you can really just start popping off with the Quinja synergy. So definitely a solid card. And then last, the C list. These are like the more niche cards, but they're still strong. They're just maybe not as overwhelmingly pickable as some of the ones above it. So Shuri got nerfed, unfortunate, and now it's in C. I know. What can you do? That's second dinner for you, but it's still pretty strong. It's just not played as much anymore since maybe people are tired of the Shuri meta, or they're just tired of like how telegraphed it is, since you have to be playing your big card in the same lane as Shuri. But still has good stats, still performs well overall. It's just not as seen anymore. Super Scroll seems to be the go-to meta counter. You're definitely seeing a lot of it with Patriot, where people are just using that to win the mirrors. But it has a lot of good matchups. It beats Dinosaur, it beats Darkhawk, it works with Blue Marvel and things like that. So there's a lot of little synergies you can just take from your opponent that still benefit you, and it just seems to have made a resurgence. So definitely a strong card right now in the metagame. Valkyrie, even though this was also a new addition, it's not as high as Bass because it requires a little bit more work. You need more expensive decks, I would say, to fully take advantage of Valkyrie, and it's not as easy to kind of plug and play, especially if it's your first unlock. So even though it's good and I do recommend the card, I wouldn't necessarily put as high as tiers as I would put Bask. And then Wasp and Zero, these got a little bit hurt by nerfs to other cards. Wasp really, if one thing you might notice is there's no Lockjaw. I would say Lockjaw statistically definitely has dropped in terms of being a core card. It used to be very up high, but it just doesn't perform to the same level anymore. So Was is used to be one of the best cards to play for Lockjaw, since you could just get a free card from it. But now with that, you lose the option, so there's less archetypes to play at Was. It's still a good card. You can still do things with it, but it's not as many different compositions to run. And then Zero was really the Shuri insurance plan for the early game, but with Shuri being less played, you don't, and Red Skull being, I guess, nerfed now, it's just not the same level of dominance that you have. So Shuri or Zero isn't seen as much. And because of that, it's still a great card. I still think Zero is a fantastic card. That's why it's still up here. But because of the nerfs, it's not as reliable to play with. Now, after this point, you have to be careful. I would say get the second opinions. Just be careful with these unlocks, because I wouldn't. I'm not. There's not as much like, oh yeah, oh, you could get this card feeling as I have above these cards. All these cards I think are pretty acceptable. The ones down here are a little bit more questionable. They're not bad though. So if these first ones are archetype builders, obviously if you want to build an archetype, right, don't let me stop you. But I just want to say, just be careful. Make sure that this is the unlock you have for the month, because you only get one per month. So you have to be very sure this is what you want to focus on, right? And if you want to focus on the archetype, be my guest, but just be careful with it. So here are all the archetype builders. You could argue Ultron could be in C, but I definitely just think that it fits more in the archetype builder slot, and it wasn't necessarily statistically significant or so from my data and my thoughts to put it in its own slot. So it's just in the archetype builders there. And then you have Luke Cage Hazmat, which is the Hazmat deck. Definitely an archetype to play, but not super dominant or anything. I wouldn't really want you to spend too much unless you know what you're doing. Mysterious for Hidden Monkey. If you have Hidden Monkey around, play Hidden Monkey. Mysterious, perfectly fine unlock. If you don't, doesn't really make too much sense there. Cerebro is actually surprising, because I thought this would be a lower quality archetype builder, but looking at the stats, it actually did much better than I thought. So actually I was like, okay, you're actually just a straight up archetype builder card here. So definitely good for Cerebro. Cerebro 2 and 3 are the most common ones to play, but there's a lot of other niche Cerebro decks that people like experimenting with. And then Falcon is just supplemental piece for Beast. Beast, I think, has more archetypes that people play with, so it's a little bit better, but Falcon is the other side of Beast. You usually use those together if you want to play a bounce deck of some kind. Then here we have the lower quality archetype builders. So these ones are a little bit just don't perform as well, essentially. So just be careful with these ones. If you think they're fun, then sure, go for it. But statistically, they aren't as consistent or don't perform as well as some of the other regular archetypes or so. So you just have to be careful. There's one that performs pretty badly. I think if you've played the game, you'll know which one it is. But overall, they all make new decks, which you can't really say for most cards, and that really deserves a mention. That hey, if you get this, you can make a new deck. So that means hey, that is interesting enough that it deserves its own slot. But because they don't perform that well, I can't say, oh yeah, go for these. So that's Wong, Hella, Mr. Negative, and Lockjaw, unfortunately. Now, next up, we have the If You Want, Need Them tier. So this tier is just for people that are missing a card or know that they want this particular card. Then sure, you can get it, right? So let's say Spider-Man's your favorite Marvel hero. I think it's good enough to just get because you like the card. Like, sure, that's actually a good reason. So these are the ones I'm saying, yeah, go for it. You can definitely just buy them out, right? And there are some like Darkhawk, Rockslide, right? If you have a Darkhawk, Rockslide makes sense. But Darkhawk is a Series 4 card, so it's not something I can just say, oh yeah, get a Darkhawk super early because you'll get a Rockslide super early because you'll get Darkhawk. That's not really true. So you have to make sure you know that you want the card itself, then you can get the pieces. So these are the ones I would say, yeah, as long as you know what you're doing or you want the card, then sure, you could use your unlock there. And then next up, these are like last piece needed, and I'm okay with. So there are some times you're missing that one card to finalize your deck. And I would say if these are the cards you are missing and you really want to play that deck, then sure, you can just get it on the unlock and then move on, right? So these are the ones I'm okay with generally. I still say it's fine to get a second opinion, but you'll have my like, are you sure message? And then if you hit the yes, then I will say, okay, you can buy it. So that's essentially what these cards are. Just have to be sure that you want these, and then you're good. Now, the next one is the last piece needed, but be careful. So these ones, I would say you definitely want to just get a second opinion on these, because honestly, a lot of these you don't really need, but there are some cases where, okay, this is the last piece you needed, then sure, you can grab it. So imagine you're going to go in the token shop, you're saying, hey, I want Yellow Jacket. Then you're like, are you sure? Right? And then you hit yes. Then you hit yes. Then you get another message. You're like, are you sure again? Like, are you really sure? That's basically what this level is. The double sure. You have to be sure that you're okay using your unlock on these cards. And if you are super sure, then okay, then sure, you can get these. So that's my level here for this one. Just make sure that you're double sure, you're careful. Definitely try to get a second opinion on these particular cards. And then the last section, of course, is the collection track level. Just get these on the collection track. They're not statistically significant for me to really recommend any of these cards. I would say none of them really jump out to me in particular. I personally like Omega Red though, so I'm like, ooh, Omega Red's here. Unfortunate, but like the stats say no. I can't really fully recommend any of these cards. So those are overall my thoughts here. Once again, these bottom ones I would avoid usually unless you have most of the top ones here. These like up to B plus tier, right? These are all going to be amazing to get, give you lots of options, lots of decks. So these are the ones I would really focus on, and hopefully this helps the people that does need it. I definitely want to update it. Wanted to update my list because my old one was a little bit rough. A lot of things have changed in 2 months, obviously, and I definitely want to kind of showcase some of the data I use because I thought that one was pretty interesting. So maybe that'll be a very future video. So anyways, hope you guys enjoy this one, learned something, and the people that needed help for this got to help. I'll see you in the next one. I want to say that I had to record this like twice because the first time I didn't record my audio and I was like crying a little bit, but I got it done. So anyways, take care of yourselves, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow, snap. Your skills will be improving. How you do